And the reason that that's helpful in trying to bless kids is we're talking about is to it points them and it makes it much more tangible to believe that there's a God who would also listen and would
Right.
also care about the things that I care about.
Right.
And so it's not just conversation for conversation's sake. We're trying to point them to a greater reality, a greater truth. Well, welcome to a Sessions podcast. We are going through a series that we are calling Bless here on our Sessions podcast. We are so glad that you are joining us. Thanks so much for taking the time and listening to this. And you might be saying, like, what is Bless? What does that mean? It's really a five-step acronym that we're talking about as how we help people discover Jesus, how we help them in their own journey of faith. And in this podcast, we're focused on what does that mean for our kids, for the next generation. Maybe it's your kids, maybe it's somebody else's kids, kids that are in your life. And so Bless is begin with prayer, listen, eat, serve, and share. And so in our first episode, we talked about how to pray for your kids. And today we're going to dive into listening and three stages of listening. And so I am really excited about this. And I'm particularly excited about the guest on this podcast today because it's my very own mother. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Jacob.
Yes, her name's Sue. You don't have to call her mom. And the
Most people
reason
don't.
yeah, the reason I'm excited about this is because she's not only my mom and the mom to my sisters, so she has been listening to all of us as we have grown, and but she's also a children's pastor, and you've been doing children's pastoring for as long as I can remember.
But as long as you have been alive, I
So
feel like,
you've
yes.
had lots of context of listening to kids, and you
Yes,
work in your current position. You also oversee the youth ministry, and so
correct.
you are listening to adolescents all of that time.
All the time.
Thanks so
Yes,
much
I
for
am.
doing this and jumping on and being a part of this. So just to give people, I think, a little bit of context also, one of the things that I have appreciated, and I've mentioned it several times in my own story and talking about, but I have appreciated the fact that you and Dad were intentional in blessing me and blessing your kids. But I also am appreciative because I know that that was not something that was done for you. Your parents were not blessing you. In fact, you and Dad were the first Christians in both of your families,
Right.
and so you've had to learn to bless and learn what it meant to bless your kids along the way. So share maybe just a little bit of that journey, that story, maybe things you've learned. Some just let us know a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, yes, you're correct. Your dad came from a more functional home than I did. I grew up in a very dysfunctional home, and as a child, even into adolescence, I felt like I never measured up,
Mm,
and therefore uh, it was not important for people to listen to me.
right.
And because there was so much fear about doing the wrong thing and the repercussions of that, I learned that uh, that I wasn't, I didn't deserve to ask
Mm,
questions.
right.
So that carried into really every aspect of my childhood, and even adulthood. So, or not, sorry, even adolescence, not really adulthood, because I was gone by that point.
Right.
But because I grew up in such a lonely, singular place, and fearful place, that that was not something that I wanted to carry into parenting.
Right.
And your dad and I were very young. I was especially young when we got married. But even in parenting, or becoming a parent, I was still, I thought, pretty young in that regard. And I didn't really have, I didn't have a great background
Right.
to even
Right.
draw from, or examples to draw from.
Right.
And but the desire to want more for my family was, and so important. And also, as I've said before, I was so fearful of what kind of mom I was going to be. We had kids basically because God said it's time to have kids.
Right.
And so I started in children's ministry before I actually became a parent.
Right.
So
And I think that's the desire. You said the desire. You wanted something different for your kids and your family. And I
yes,
think all of us, not that, obviously, I'm very appreciative of the child that I have, but I think all parents have this desire to leave their kids maybe better or a leg up from what they grew up with or what their current. But a lot of times, we don't even know how to do that. It seems so insurmountable to
right.
try and find ways to break out of that. And so a big part of both you and Dad's story is that some of those things were only broken because you decided to follow Jesus.
Right.
There's no way to get around. Like that would not be something that you could have taken on your own.
Uh, right. Because it's only in that relationship that my relationship with Jesus,
Right.
that I was able to find any sort of acceptance. And
Mm.
so, even, I mean, I don't, most of us don't want to be bad parents. We want to be good parents.
Right. Right. Right.
And so, and sometimes, um, sometimes we can be, or at least I was driven by that perfection need.
Sure.
Not that I wanted to just be a good parent, I had to be a perfect parent.
Mm.
And it's not until you have this relationship with Jesus that is more accepting of your imperfections, and
Right. Right.
that knowledge that you're not going to be perfect, and that's okay.
Right.
That's why we have Jesus. And so, so yes, it's only in what I learned, I think, in being loved by a God, a Father God, a Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, that I was able to embrace all aspects of love. And
Right.
that makes you a better parent.
Right.
Or bet yes. So
Absolutely. If we're holding on to the promise that hey, we are blessed to be a blessing, you have to come to this acceptance of okay, God's blessing me, right?
right.
And if we were to go through all of the five things in that blessed, begin with prayer, listen, eat, serve, and share, we could find all of those things. Like God's doing those on our behalf. Jesus is interceding on our behalf. He's beginning
Right.
with prayer. We have a God who listens to our prayers, the Holy Spirit who listens to us as we go through life. We are being blessed, and so as a result, we can then bless others, and we can bless our kids, and we can
Right.
break cycles and chains and things for our family moving forward because of the blessing that we've received.
Yeah. And while that might focus in on our own kids, um, there is also a generation of
Right,
kids that we can extend that to. It's like, the grace that we receive, and the example that we're given, when we share that with, at least for me, I feel like when we extend that um, to a younger generation,
right.
we can have confidence then that we create that legacy of Jesus.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, obviously, we're coming at this from a Christian perspective. You decided to follow Jesus, and you have helped your kids follow Jesus. If you're joining us and you're not a Christian, or you don't consider yourself a Christian yet, I still think there's things that you can glean from what we're going to talk about of three different stages of listening. But that's honestly the perspective that we come from. It's how we live our life, and it's made a difference.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where we're coming from. Like I said, though, that does, if you're still exploring faith, that's totally fine. You can still listen. You can be a listener with people as we go through that. And like you mentioned, this isn't just for parents, right? You maybe you're a grandparent, maybe you're a guardian, maybe you're volunteer with some kind of kids. Maybe you're a teacher, a coach, and maybe it's a volunteer in an organization like a church or Girl Scouts or Boy Scouts. If it's about how we can do this for the next generation that's coming behind us, and we can bless them. And one of those things is listening. And so one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast is because you've been listening to me for a long time. And you've been listening to kids for a long time, and I wanted to talk about the three different stages of listening, whether that's childhood. What does it mean to listen in childhood? What does it mean to listen in adolescence? Because I think there's some differences there. I'm just now getting into that stage with my own kids. And then what does it mean to listen to kids in adulthood, and how have those things changed? So let's start off with childhood. As I said, you're a kids pastor, you're a mom, now you're a grandparent. What have you found has been helpful in listening to kids as they are on their own journey of faith and exploring the world and learning about themselves? What are some things that you would go, this is what you need to have to do to be able to listen to kids?
I think with kids, especially, that requires a lot of patience. Because uh, the good thing is with kids, especially as we're learning how to listen better,
Yeah.
with kids, they demand it.
Right, right.
They're, they will make themselves heard. Um, Now there's a pro and a con to that, because we, as the adult or the
Right.
older listener, can get a little bit lazy if we
Mhm.
stay in that stage, right? If we
Right.
go, well, you're gonna make yourself heard, and as we find out, that is not the case as children grow in adolescence.
Right.
They don't make themselves heard, but they desperately want to be heard.
Right. Right.
And because of that, and because there uh, there are many words
So
in
many
that
words.
process.
Oh my gosh.
So many words and so many stories. And so I have learned that I have to get I needed to be better in asking questions.
Mm.
Um be, in order to maybe hear what is, let's say, the bottom line, or
Right.
what is really what you want to share about your day, or share about what is going on. um, and it may take a lot of words to get to that point. And when you're a parent of younger children, or
Right. Right.
even multiple children, and you have all the things that go on in being an adult, it requires that slowing down and intentionality. I think that's the right word.
Sure.
Intentionality and trying to sift through uh, all the words that you're getting, and
Right.
all the distractions that are going on around you.
Yeah,
And
because
so,
when you're an adult, your life doesn't stop, right? There's
right.
things that are happening, but like you said, there's a lot going on. Kids don't have the conversational like structure yet, right? Like
Right.
here's the story I'm telling, here's the point I'm trying to make. And a lot of times they don't even know if there's a point that they're trying to make, or that there's something going on the inside. And so you get all, it's sometimes very meandering.
Yes.
Sometimes it's like, is there a point to this at all? Because they just don't know the conversational conventions that we use as adults, and so you have to be willing to kind of lock in. And sometimes that can be really hard. It can be really hard when you are 10 minutes deep into a conversation about Pokemon, to stay locked in and engaged to try and get to this meaningful conversation and moment.
Yes. And yeah. And then um, you also, kids also are not, they're not great at, or they haven't learned yet that to that their emotion that they're sharing doesn't always go along with the words that they're sharing, and
Right,
they don't know how to filter that.
right,
They're just, they're unfiltered as far
right,
as emotion goes. And so but if we as adults can be empathetic in receiving that, um and receiving even in the emotion in there, then they don't shut down, because the goal is we don't. And that had always been my goal as a parent,
right,
was I didn't want to experience a shutdown in communication,
right,
um, even as we head into adolescence.
right.
May I share just a story about
Sure.
Pokemon?
Yeah, go for
Uh,
it.
so this was one of, it was a great practice session for me in good listening. I took a child out after school, and took them to just a treat after school.
Right,
And I knew that the only thing that was going to be a good connection for conversation was anime, and all the things that go along
right,
with
right.
that,
The
and
entire
all the
world.
stories. And I am not joking. This was a girl, but she did not stop talking, not like, did not barely take a breath for a half hour,
Oh my gosh.
explaining all of these things. And I don't retain things as easily, but I remember having this conversation. Okay, you just have to remember one really good point
Right,
of what
right,
she's
right, right,
saying, because she's going to ask
right.
something. um, but if I could remember the one thing, then she would know that
Yeah,
I was listening.
right,
And uh, that was a great lesson for me to continue to practice on, and on anything.
right,
I get lost with Minecraft and
right, right, right.
all of the games. So
Yeah. I love that of just trying to hold on to one thing. What's your favorite character, your favorite whatever, just as that point of connection, right? That, hey, I want you to know that I have listened to you and that I have made note of the things that you care about, right? And the reason that that's helpful in trying to bless kids is we're talking about it points them and it makes it much more tangible to believe that there's a God who would also listen and would
Right.
also care about the things that I care about.
Right.
And so it's not just conversation for conversation's sake. We're trying to point them to a greater reality, a greater truth. And I also love the part that you said about asking questions because a lot of times kids don't know how to process their own emotions. They don't know
Right.
maybe how to express the emotions. And so as you're listening to an interaction or a story, you might have to help them along the way. Well, how did that make you feel? Man, that sounds like it made you really upset. Is that true? Kind of, is that what you were feeling? Or, a lot of times it's also helping them process their own fears. Man, was that scary? And if you start to give them some of the emotion words along with that, that helps them process that and communicate that in a way where then once again you can start to speak different truths about who they are and about the world that they live in back to them along with that.
Right.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of listening, ask questions to really help them kind of get to their emotions in
Yes.
childhood. Remembering those things and trying to stick to those points as conversation meanders. That's great. As kids then start to move toward adolescence, and I'm just getting into that stage with my own kids. The listening starts to change a little bit.
Yes.
And what would you say is important about listening to kids in that stage?
Um, I I think listening in that stage, as any sort of adult that's in a guidance kind of role,
Right.
is to uh, to be confident in who you are and understand that sometimes those words and what gets shared with you
Mm,
in adolescence is a little bit more accusatory. It's a little bit more aggressive in what they're communicating, again because it's a stage and they're learning.
right.
But we as the adult or whatever can take that a little bit more personally.
Sure.
Maybe women more than men. I'm not sure about that, but I think generally speaking that becomes a lot of the points of conflict, with parents or
Mm,
even with youth pastors and
right.
youth leaders, because there is a change, and it tends to just uh, it tends to be a little bit more on point.
Yes.
um, and and again, it it's all about them
Sure. Right.
because
Absolutely.
they're learning how to
Right.
make it about other people. And
Right.
so at that point I feel like the even the questions um ha- almost have to become more open ended.
Right.
Like when they're elementary, they can be uh more, not directive, but more pointed and more
Mm,
uh detailed. But when you're dealing with adolescents, it starts to get, because their world is so much more open
right.
and or expanding, and
Right.
so your questions almost have to be expanding. And
Expanding
there
makes sense.
is a lot of um, listening, repeating what you hear, and then clarifying that.
Right.
So um, because then they understand that they've been heard.
Right.
Even if you're repeating it back wrong, the point that you're asking and saying, okay, this is what I think you're saying. Is that right?
Right.
Gives them a little bit of, well, it gives them more value for sure.
Sure.
And then it does open the door a little bit more to say, it's a little bit easier to communicate truths, because again, they're all in their emotions.
All in
Everything
their
is
emotions. Oh, for
all of their
sure.
emotions.
So many emotions, so many
Oh my,
hormones, so many
yes.
things going on.
And so that's how I found it. I've found it to be a little bit different.
Yeah.
And that becomes a little bit more, I would say, self-sacrificing from the adult part.
From the man.
Yeah. Or
right.
Or the older person.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Where you're
Parent,
going, you know what? It doesn't matter whether it's not as important for me to be heard. It's if I want to continue a relationship where there's an opportunity
right
to be heard.
Yeah, because like you said, this is just a stage, right? You don't want to
Right.
do something in this stage that has long-term effects into the next stage.
Right.
And below that, not below that, but you're trying to. I love that idea of self-sacrifice, maybe a little more required in this stage of listening to an adolescent, especially like you said, because one of the features of adolescence is just pushing on boundaries, right? Once again, you did that when you were a toddler. You're doing it again as a teenager. You're pushing on boundaries to see to try and find your place in the world, and to explore the world more because your world is expanding. And sometimes that comes across in your conversation, in the words that you say. A lot of times I'm noticing it's in the tone. As I am interacting with my own adolescent child, I can hear you interacting with me as an adolescent, because they literally, it does not cross their mind that their tone of voice is communicating something so different from they have no idea that they're they have an angry tone or a disrespectful tone. It doesn't even process in their minds that way, or whatever. They're pushing their boundaries a little bit and exploring in that.
Yes. And what I found this in teaching, that if I could let them know kind of what my boundaries, were my boundaries,
right,
that was helpful. Not in the moment, but to let them know ahead of time, hey, I'm just going to let you know, and I'm going to let you know when you're kind of getting close to that boundary,
right.
So that I can hear you better. And I especially had those kind of issues with your youngest sister,
sure,
who was the most expressive of her opinions out of the three of you. And I remember having a conversation with her one time specifically where I just said, I can hear you much better. I want you to say what you're saying.
Right. I want you to say it.
Yeah. I do want to hear it, but I hear you much better when you're not yelling at me.
Right.
And I think that was helpful it was especially helpful for her and I, or she and I, in our conversations. But you're right, because they just need to know the boundaries, and kind of what they're working. Then they feel like it's a fair, but then when there is a repercussion, it feels more fair to them. That's how they voiced it to me.
Right.
I currently am working with junior high girls on Wednesday nights, and that small group, a lot of times I just have to re-communicate. Hey,
Right.
this, these, if you want it to be safe for you, it's got to be safe for everybody in that room.
Right.
And
In the
in order,
conversation.
right, and in order to make it more safe, these are the things you need to know ahead of time. And especially, again, when you're dealing with maybe kids that are not your own kids,
Right.
and they want to have confident, or they want to know that you're a safe person to talk to. I uh, for example, I always let them know, hey, I can keep a confidence as long as it is not hurting you or hurting others.
Right.
Then I may need to go to somebody else
Right.
to because it keeps you safe and the other person safe. So
Right, and the idea of is I do want a safe environment, right? A
right,
lot of times, for kids, they're a little more trusting. It's a little bit easier to share. Now, that's not always true. Every
but
situation is different, but a
right,
lot of times that is true. As you move into adolescence, there's been times where you have been hurt, or you don't know what's safe. You have maybe felt betrayed at certain points. You've gotten pushback when you've tried to express yourself, and so you have to reassure them that this is a safe place. I love one of the things that you pointed out in the conversations around adolescence is your own sense of security in your identity.
right,
And a lot of times that's also because one of the things that they're doing in their own stage of life is trying to figure out their own identity.
right,
And so if you're not safe and secure in your own identity, even willing to be able to bear some self-sacrifice on your part, then what happens is that they're exploring their identity. It feels like an attack on you or a hurt toward you, an offense toward you, and then they miss out on the chance. You miss out on the conversation to listen to them express themselves. And if you're not willing to listen to them express themselves, then you don't have the opportunity then to speak words back into them that will shape the identity of their life.
right,
And that's a huge part of listening in adolescence is I want to listen. I'm trying to listen for those identity kind of conversations, whether that's good or bad. I want to listen for that so that we can have a deeper conversation about who you are, what you do, the things you do come out of who you are. All of those things, those are meaningful, important conversations for us to have at that point in that stage in life, because that's what they're dealing with on an everyday basis.
right. Yeah. And when they're adolescents, there's a whole lot more voices.
Yeah, right.
They've got way more teachers, they've got way more they could have coaches. There's a lot more voices when they're adolescents. And if I just want to be a breakthrough voice.
Right.
I don't
Right.
I don't want to be the Charlie Brown teacher.
Yeah, right. Because they're getting a
Is
lot of that. They're honestly
yes,
they're getting a lot of people talking at them,
correct.
and they're going to be much more willing to have an actual conversation with the person that will listen to them than they
Right.
will. If you will invest in your own listening, they will be more willing to then listen when you want to speak.
Yes. Yeah. That's what
So you got you three different phases. You how to listen when you got kids in your life, how to listen when you have adolescents in your life, and now you are in this third stage where you're listening to your adult kids.
yes.
And what does it mean to listen to? I have no context for this because I'm the one that needs to be listened to. So what does it mean to listen to your adult kids and try and bless them in their adulthood? And obviously they're adults, but we're still your kids.
Yes. Um, the two words that popped into my head um, uh, automatically were humility,
Mm,
um, number one, and then um, and then really honesty or authenticity,
yeah.
um, because with you children as adults, um, I had to realize that uh, I really didn't. I don't have all the answers, and
Right.
even when
Right.
you guys are sharing, um, mostly it's listening, um, and then being honest when um, that I can relate
Yeah.
or I can not relate, and that there 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 might be somebody better than me
Mm,
to um, hear something, and being willing to direct you all
right.
in that, um, and I have tried to put that into practice, um, especially since your dad died.
Right.
And well, number one, you're the oldest. Number two, you're a man. And I realized in some of our conversations that I go, I can't be dad because
Right.
I'm
Right.
not.
Right.
And um and that's humbling.
Sure.
Or it was for me, it was
Yeah.
humbling. Um
Yeah.
and I think it feeds into what I said at the very beginning. It's that uh, that somehow I am imperfect. Well, yeah, I am. I am.
Right.
I can't be everything. And
Right.
so, and then I've also learned that uh, this is largely through counseling, that how I receive and react to life, if I'm not honest with
Mm,
myself, then you all don't feel the freedom to be honest.
right. Right.
um
That's really
and
good.
and so, with your, I mean, we probably learned that mostly with your sister,
Right.
um and realizing she needs space to be sometimes brutally honest with
Right.
where she's at in life, um, and um, and uh, and I, as a parent, want to be able to give you all the freedom for that.
Right.
And I realized that some of my put your head down, get through it, be a survivor mode of life could prevent you all from honestly communicating where you're at.
Wow.
Um, and again, if the goal is to continue to have communication um, and it's for that to always get better, then things have to things have to change like that.
Right.
And so
And I
those were
would
the two
say,
that popped ahead.
yeah, that's those are really great, humility and honesty, and I'd say because I have been an adult now watching that process, I can see the change in that in our own communication with each other, as a family. That's a thing that we've tried to grow in,
Yeah.
and I think you get to you recognize that as you're working through that, and that's what leads to the moments. Once again, you're as a parent of adult kids, you're still trying to point us to Jesus. But if you can't be honest about your life or the experiences that are going, then whatever you might have to say about God or faith or life, can get brushed aside because we're not dealing with the same reality.
Right.
And we don't want to, once again, that's we don't want to get to that point because we want to be able to to continue. We want to have an ongoing conversation with our kids for as long as we get to, and we want to be able to model what it looks like for to we in some sense we are the model of this is what God does for you. And so God is also honest,
Mhm.
and He is also humble, and so we want to model that as we go through that. So that's really good. I appreciate the fact that you have listened to me through all three stages and have continued on. I think this has been a really helpful conversation. I hope that you've walked away with something, as we've talked about. We want to bless our kids. Part of that means we listen. And that looks different in all kinds of stages of life, but that we have the opportunity to do that. And when we listen to our kids, it makes a huge difference in their life. It makes a huge difference in their own journey of faith. And you have done that for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I love you.
I love
So
you too. Well, that wraps up our Sessions podcast in our Bless series. This is episode 2, listening. We're going to continue breaking down what does it mean to eat, serve, and share with your kids. Share this with your friends, other parents in your life, coaches, teachers. We would love to do that. Let's be in this conversation together because we want to bless the next generation together. Hope you have a great week.
All we need is love. All we need is love in the shelter. All we need is love. All we need is love.